Hello, I'm Father Matthew Hawkins, and I'm here today to talk with you about holding conversations with members of the parish in order to work on pastoral plans and on mission statements, but above all, to keep in touch with parishioners and to keep them engaged in the process of building even a more vital and lively parish. You'll notice that in the sample of the conversations that I held with parishioners, the discussion follows a kind of chronological order. And that is so that we can encourage people to talk about things in greater depth. It begins with the earliest impressions, the earliest experiences. And if the person that I'm holding the conversation with was not originally a member of that parish, but only joined the parish recently, then you want to get a sense of what that person's prior experience was, what their experience was in a church, in a faith-based community, or in another parish before coming to the parish that we currently find them in. If they are a lifelong member of the parish, if they've been a member of the parish for many years, for almost all their adult life, or maybe even from childhood they grew up in the parish, then we're talking about first impressions and we're drawing on memory. A lot of rich information can come out of these experiences, but the primary function of that part of the discussion is to prime the pump so that it's easier for them to then move into a discussion about their current experiences in the parish. People can draw on their memories, and there is a kind of distance from the memory. And on the one hand, for some people, the memories might be vague, but it helps them to feel more comfortable talking about parish life when they're talking about something that is specific and concrete, such as a memory. And then that makes it easier for them to talk about their current experiences in the parish. So the first part of the discussion is on first impressions, early impressions. What stands out for you in your memory of the parish? And then we move into a discussion, hopefully smoothly, into their current activities in the parish. And frequently what you'll find is that the person you're having a conversation with will begin to mix those two. They'll begin to talk about the current ministries, for example, that they're involved in, the current activities within the parish. And again, you want to encourage people to talk about whatever stands out for them. We can get to the reasons these things stand out for them, but you always want to ask them for a specific example. And then the final stage is to talk about what they envision going forward, what their vision for the future of the parish is. So the sequence is early experiences, current interaction with parishioners, current involvement in parish ministries, and then what they envision going forward. Now, what people are tempted to do is to give you evaluative answers. In other words, well, I think the parish is doing a good job at this. I think it's doing a good job at that. I think it's doing a poor job at the other. Or I think as they go backwards in time, back in the history, I think they were good at this. I think they were good at that. You really want to, you can't cut them off. So you allow them to express that, but that's not what you're really looking for. You aren't looking for evaluative answers. You're looking for descriptive answers. You want them to describe things. So if, for instance, they say, well, I think our parish, when you talk about earliest memories, well, one of the things I remember at the parish is it was very good at welcoming people. Okay, that is an evaluative answer. And so what you'll find yourself saying very frequently in the conversation is, can you give an example of, or other people will use the phrase, talk about, and in this case, talk about how the parish was welcoming. But you want, as best you can, to extract from them a concrete example of how they experienced either the welcoming of the parish or the parish's involvement in social justice ministry, or the parish's ability to convey or preserve distinctive culture. you want examples of these things, because within the examples, usually there are stories. What you really want to do, and this is harder, as you might notice in the sample of the conversations that are posted, is to get them to talk about a specific event. So beyond a specific example, even a specific event. An event is a story. And what you want are events that happened to the person that you're talking with, or a story about an event that even if the person you're talking to wasn't there, didn't have firsthand experience with it, but it's a story that stuck with them that somebody else told them, that's good too. Because when we get to the third stage, which is for them to talk about their stories, to unpack their stories with you, then what you get from the secondhand story is, well, what does that story mean to you? I mean, you heard it from another parishioner, but how do you feel about that story? And what does that story tell you? I mean, what does that story tell you about the parish? So a secondhand story is good so long as it means something to the person who's telling it, and so long as it's coming from them. So you want this, obviously, firsthand experience. For them to talk about firsthand experience is good. But also if they say, well, when I think about how welcoming the parish is, or how involved the parish is in the community, I think about this story that somebody once told me. That's good too, if we can discuss why that story particularly resonates with them and why it means something to them. So we want to begin with first impressions. We want to move to current activities in the parish. And then we want to, at the end, talk about what they envision going forward. We want to try to target specific events. We want to get examples. We don't just want vague evaluative statements about how the parish is good or bad in certain areas, but give examples, preferably to talk about an actual event, and hopefully even a transformative event. I thought this, but it turned out to be that. I went in expecting this, and then something else happened. Those are narratives that actually have an arc of transformation. You begin at one place at the beginning of the arc, and you end up somewhere else at the end. Those are actually very good stories if you can get them in the course of the conversation. Now, several things that would guide these conversations. There are questions about who are we? You know, what is our parish identity? This is a question that you want to keep in mind. Now, but you don't want to ask that directly. I mean, again, you're asking them about events and stories, but you want them to tell you a story that tells them who the parish is, or if they say they're talking about what their impression of the parish was before they joined it, that's a reputation, that's an identity. That's how the parish is seen from people outside of the parish, and maybe even how it's seen from people inside the parish. So if they say, well, ours is the type of parish that is known for, you know, the architecture within the parish, or the artwork within the parish, or the music within the parish. Again, you want them, well, tell me a particular time that music or architecture moved you. Or tell me a particular time that moved somebody else that you heard about. Yeah. And so then from that we get a story. But so you're listening for what in this conversation is the person saying that tells me something about the parish identity. Now I want to kind of divert for a moment to another topic, and that is, you'll notice in the interviews, you aren't putting yourself in there. I mean, it's very tempting to, when somebody is sharing their story or their impressions, for you to give your story and your impressions or give your opinion. You really only are likely to have an hour with this person. And what I notice is when people do that, I mean, they might feel that that's a good way to stimulate discussion, but they wind up talking more than the person that they're supposed to be having a conversation with. So you want to try to avoid that. You want to be as invisible as possible. You're feeding them questions and basically giving them invitations, giving them an opportunity to talk about their experiences in the parish. And then you back off and let them go with it because it's their story, it's their experience, not yours and not your opinions. And if you start talking about your experience and your opinions, two things can happen. One is you might influence what they say, and so you aren't actually getting their perspective. And the other thing is that you can hog up all the time, and they might shut down altogether. They might just sit back and listen to you. So you want to try to avoid that. Be as transparent as possible in the process. Just lay those prompts out there. Your role is to put out the prompts so that they are discussing aspects of parish life as they have experienced it. So who are we? What is our parish identity? What do we do? What is the purpose of the parish? In other words, how does it function? So when we think of parish identity, that's usually under the historical part. Earliest impressions, first experiences with the parish, what I thought about the parish before I even visited it, that kind of thing. That's usually where you're going to find the discussion about parish identity. Where you're going to find about the purpose, the function of the parish, the role of the parish, is what's happening in the parish now. What is your interaction with other parishioners? When you see members of the parish during the week, do you spend time together, and what do you do during that time? And then finally, how might we challenge ourselves? What should be our direction for the future and going forward? And what you'll notice is you want to avoid asking questions that they can answer with either a yes or no. You don't want those kinds of questions. You want open-ended questions. Tell me about a time when the parish helped you through a difficult moment in life. For example, if they say that this is a very caring parish and it helps you through times of difficulty, tell me about a time when that happened, or give me an example of that. Those are open-ended questions that can't be answered yes or no, but they require some description and some elaboration. Don't say, do you think this is a good parish to go to if you want your children to have a solid religious education? Well, yes or no. Yeah. And that just kills the discussion right there, and it doesn't open up the opportunity for stories. That's for the surveys or some other thing. But here we're trying to get richer information. So you want to ask open-ended questions and also be prepared to change. This is the reason why you don't want to have your questions written out ahead of time in detail. Because if you have all your questions written out ahead of time and you have a particular script, then it's very tempting to stick with the script, and you want to listen to what they're telling you, because they're going to throw something out there that you couldn't even anticipate. And we call that a bunny trail. Be prepared to follow them down that bunny trail. In other words, be prepared to allow them to take you somewhere in a conversation that you didn't even plan, where you didn't even plan to go and that you hadn't even anticipated. Follow them down the bunny trail. They make a statement, and if it's not clear to you how it all hangs together or what it means to them, you might have a hunch, but you aren't sure. By all means, ask more questions in order for them to flesh out the details and give a complete picture. Don't pretend to understand what they're saying and where they're coming from if you really don't understand it. Because if you don't clearly understand it, then somebody who would be watching it, not that anybody's going to be watching your conversations, but if you had recorded the conversation and somebody else watched it, they probably aren't going to understand either. And so and people will appreciate it. It will force them to pause and to think, because so usually we all give shorthand answers where we expect people to know what we're talking about. And so when you say, well, could you give an example? Or you ask, well, wait a minute, that was interesting. Can you tell me a little bit more about it? People usually, they have to pause, but they do appreciate it. And then they have to regroup, and then they really have to think about it. Well, that's what you want. You want them to think about it. You want to create a conversation that everybody is thinking about, rather than just giving pat answers and stereotypical answers and predictable answers. So pursue the bunny trails. Go down those things that are taking you to a place that you really hadn't expected to run into. And also, in order to make sure that you understand what they're saying, don't hesitate to paraphrase and restate their answers for clarity, for clarification. And then they can correct you. You might notice several times in these interviews that I will attempt to paraphrase what a person has said, and they will clarify. They'll say, well, I really can't speak to that, but I am saying this, and they'll clarify and say what it is that they intend to say. That's good. So it does two things. First of all, it does three things. It forces you to listen. Secondly, it lets them know that you are listening. And thirdly, it gives them the feedback on the conversation. It gives them a sense of what you're hearing, what you believe they're communicating, whether or not that is what they intended to communicate, so that they know what they need to clarify in the communication. So it's very helpful to paraphrase and restate the answers as they, especially if you aren't sure that you are hearing what they're saying correctly. And again, since you're listening for specific categories of answers, parish identity, purpose of the parish, ultimate destination of the parish, then at some points in the conversation, you are likely to put out some feelers because a narrative begins to form in your mind about what's important to them. And so you will begin to put out feelers to see if you're really filling in the picture accurately. And and speaking of the narrative beginning to form in your mind and recognizing what's important for them, that goes back to the issue of bunny trails. If you notice that they are talking about, for instance, in one interview, the person talks about the architecture, and every church that this person talks about, they initially talk about the space, the architecture of the church. That lets you know what they notice. Now, they might not be aware of that, but then you want to, so go with that, right? I mean, then ask them additional questions. They might not volunteer comments about the architecture in the current church that they're in, but then you want to ask that question and give them a chance to either clarify or explain whether or not that has had an impact on them. But if you clearly see that something is going to stand out for everybody. For some people, it might be the architecture of the parish. For some people, it might be the homilies of the priest. And for some people, it will be the choir, the music in the parish. For some people, it will be the social life. But whatever themes they continue to return to, you want to explore that, build on that, because that's something that is important to them. Don't say, well, we're talking too much about music and we aren't covering the other things. I want to talk about the charitable services or the social environment and things like that. No, focus on what's important to them, because that's where the stories are. And that's where the richness of their perspective comes in. Again, it's about their experience, their perspective. There will be plenty of other people who will be engaged in these conversations who can speak to the other aspects of parish life as those impact them. So you want to go with what's important to the person you're holding the conversation with. And at the end, you want to discuss how they feel about the story that they told you and what that story means to them. Now, in one of the discussions, a person basically said, I don't have any feelings about it. I don't really care about, feeling any way about it. I'm just concerned about what we do next, right? And so then, you might have, of course, the point is you want them to think about and analyze the story or the events or the examples that they've given you. And so they may be more responsive, and in that case, the person was. They may be more responsive if your focus, if you shift and say, okay, well then what do you think about this? Or what does this tell you about the parish at that time and maybe the parish going forward? So feelings, hopefully you can get them to talk about feelings, because it actually has a richer, there's actually richer content, but part of the culture and part of our various socialization experiences in society, some people don't feel comfortable talking about feelings, and so that becomes a dead end, or something that requires a lot more work to draw it out. Other things you want to keep in mind in the course of the conversation would be, again, and these aren't direct questions, and usually people will answer this in the course of giving their examples and their stories and their events. But as the conversation is taking place, you want to make sure that indirectly that they have talked about the territory in which the parish is located, that they've talked about demographics, both within the parish and in surrounding communities, how those demographics have changed or how they've stayed the same. The social atmosphere within the parish, the social atmosphere within the different worship sites, what's characteristic of that social environment. The issues, the larger social issues that are impacting members of the parish and or members of the surrounding community. How the parish is engaging the surrounding community. And finally, at the end, since we're conducting these conversations at a very unique time, the series of questions that will be more direct would generally come at the end in terms of thinking about where we move forward from here. But keep in mind, after about 45 minutes of talking about early experiences in the parish or the history of the parish, and also talking about current experiences in the parish, or what it's like to be a parishioner or work in the various ministries in the parish, only at that point have people had time to really process what they really think about the parish, and it makes it a whole lot easier then during the final 15 minutes to talk about the future and the vision and where they want to see going forward. But if you begin with that, if you begin with, where do you see the parish going from here and what should the future look like, the responses are either going to be the very predictable responses, or you won't get much of a response at all. But the final questions about the future in these very difficult times would be, in the post-COVID world, how do you see the parish as having been changed due to the pandemic that we've been through for the past 12 or more months? You know that a lot has changed. A lot's changed in terms of how we've delivered ministry. And even if things begin to go back to something that resembles life before the pandemic, it's not going to be completely that way. And now we've learned new things, new ways of holding meetings and delivering ministry that we, for better or for worse, we aren't likely to unlearn. I mean, we've learned how to use technology in new ways that can actually be beneficial. And in other ways, we feel a sense of loss about not being able to meet face to face. But this is, so you want to ask them about the COVID world. How should we position ourselves for life after the pandemic is over? That's going to be very important now in terms of pastoral planning, because we do have to think about what the world is going to be like at the end of the pandemic and how the parish will function in that kind of a world. Now, without a surprise, it won't be surprising if people say, well, that's unknown territory. I really don't know. But they will have some approximation, none of us do, but they'll have some approximations, and those can be very insightful. Also, given the polemics within society and within the church, there's a lot of controversy, even within the church itself, about controversy about liturgy, controversy about the various roles of the Pope, of the cardinals, of bishops, and things are much more contentious certainly in the life of the church, than they had been previously. And so the question is, are you experiencing that in the parish? Now, there's a yes or no question. But to follow that up with, how are you experiencing it? Or why do you think that it doesn't seem to be so prevalent in this particular parish, that we aren't divided and the polemics don't come to the surface in this parish? That's your open-ended question to it. But you want to get a sense of what the impact or lack of impact of the polemics in society in general, in the parish in particular, how that has affected the parish. Because again, this is a highly relevant issue. It's unavoidable given the state of the church today and the state of society. If your church has recently experienced a merger, this won't be true for St. Benedict the Moor, but it will be true for St. Mary Magdalene. Then, of course, the question is, going forward is, how do you, the temptation is actually to ask an evaluative question. Is the merger going well? But if their answer to that, whether they say it is going well or it isn't going well, you again want to follow up with the descriptive question. Well, what makes it good, or what makes it not so good? What are the experiences that you've had in the course of this merger that make you feel as though things are running smoothly, or that the merger is running smoothly, or that it isn't running so smoothly? Rather than asking, what can we do about it? How can we make this better? Now, if you ask that kind of question, you're back to the survey types questions. You're back to the evaluative questions. And we always want to privilege descriptive questions over the evaluative questions. And finally, this would apply more to St. Benedict the Moor, not so much to St. Mary Magdalene. You would want to ask about, well, what does it mean to be a personal parish? What do you feel that means for the future of St. Benedict the Moor? What special challenges does that present us with? What special opportunities does that present us with? Again, an open-ended question. Describe for me what it means to be a personal parish, and how we can make the best out of that personal parish experience. And so that's basically the framework for conducting these conversations. Again, you want to keep in mind that you're looking for events, for examples, for stories that will help you to hold a conversation about the parish identity and the purpose and function of the parish and where the parish needs to go in the future. You want to set this up in a way that they are talking early on about their first experiences with the parish, and then move into current activities, and to close with where they see the future of the parish, where it's headed. You want to make sure that you provide them with open-ended prompts, that you make yourself as invisible as possible, and that you don't put yourself too much in the conversation, so that they have room to talk and they can discuss their experiences and their perspective. You want to talk about territory, about demographics, about the social atmosphere in the parish, and about the issues that are affecting parishioners and the surrounding community, and how the parish does or does not engage that surrounding community. And so I hope that this will be helpful for you as you begin to hold your conversations with other members of Pastoral Council initially, and then parishioners who are not members of Pastoral Council. Don't make it a stilted process. Relax, enjoy the conversation, make it conversational. Don't stick too heavily with the script. You have a general idea of what you're looking for and how to structure the discussion. Beyond that, you don't need too much that would make the conversation seem artificial. By all means, the most important thing is to actively listen, so that when people say things that are unexpected, you can grab a hold of that and ask for more detail, more elaboration, and really allow the conversation to go wherever it needs to go based on the person that you're having a conversation with. I'm Father Matthew Hawkins, and God bless you, and happy conversation holding.